The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.
Hi, welcome to the Cashman Mind, Body, Spirit show. Today is going to be very interesting and very relevant going on today. You can think of it, the coronavirus 19 and the soil. What am I talking about? What I'm speaking about is there's a difference between viruses and bacteria. The small little things that are causing illnesses, and bacteria are much bigger, okay? And they have their own metabolism. They know how to get energy, and they have their own genetic structure. They can reproduce without borrowing genes from other animals, for example, versus a virus. A virus is much smaller. 500 times so smaller. And the virus does not have a source of energy itself. People even discuss and wonder if it's a living thing. It cannot multiply or get the correct number of genes or DNA, reproduce, and without stealing energy from somebody else. Yeah, and what it does, if this is a human cell right here, and these have receptors on them, these little fingers that are weave about, the virus comes along, latches on, enters the cell, and steals the sugar and the genetic structure and the fatty acids which come from sugar, multiplies itself, and the virus itself is only about 2 to 200 genes, which is only part of this genetic structure, which gives us instructions on how to behave and how to reproduce and form membranes. So it goes into the cell and steals these things, especially sugar and fatty acids. So people who have more sugar in the cells are much more likely to become infected. A type 2 diabetic, for example, would be an example. So when we try to avoid the virus through mass distancing ourselves, we have another opportunity, though, to get rid of some of the sugar out of ourselves, and we are much less likely to become infected. So let's start with the show, okay? I'm going to go through ancient plagues and things a little bit, just to give you a little bit of history, and let's look at our present day, for example. I saw on the news today they had about 212,000 deaths in this nation so far. Maybe 20-25% of the deaths in the world. We represent only 5% of the people of the world, but yet we have a much higher rate of deaths. And that's what today is all about, to try to help you prevent it. You must participate in your health to get the job done. They're even thinking, you know, right now about 1,000 people a day in the U.S. are dying. You know what they're thinking by December? 4,000. Once we pass 400,000, 416,000, we will have had more deaths than World War II. I mean, how sad. So let's get to work, gain some information, and see if we can't reduce the rate. Okay? What do I think the problem is? Let's be honest with each other. Lack of leadership. We're not even picking. And it's not just the president. It's the head of CDC, National Health Service, many other agencies who have failed us because these people were in charge, and they should have told us more than they did. Okay, so it's many things. So let me tell you some difference in terms of pandemic if it's all over the world. Okay, and now that we are traveling with trains and planes and ships and whatever, is that things can spread quickly. We have to be aware of that. A pandemic, so that an infection with a virus or bacteria, say locally confined, can now spread over the world a lot quicker. And we have to watch out for that. Okay? So an epidemic, you know, is a local area of infection, just very local, an epidemic. Then an endemic is a little bit bigger, say even in our country. But once it escapes our country, it's a pandemic. And it goes into a world problem, and that can occur very quickly. I'll talk to you about that a little more later. So what's increased it really is contact between humans and animals and all other living things. Okay, it can spread a lot quicker, and animals can carry these viruses around. Some don't transmit from animals to humans. It could be a rat, a flea, a bird, a pig, a cow, a horse, and we have to learn that science. Okay, and so let's review the history of bacterial, viral, fungal, pan, epi, and endemics further. These pandemics have been here for thousands of years, and maybe millions of years, actually. The bubonic plague, B-U-B-O-N-S-E, bubonic plague, was a bacteria, not a virus. So it was bigger. And a virus has only about 200 to 500 genes versus humans like 30,000. Chimpanzee, only 2% less. Okay, so even a worm has about 8,000 genes. So, but a virus has only a few. It goes into the cell and steals the genes of the cell using sugar for energy to reproduce itself. So what's in that cell is very important. So it steals the genetic code of the cell that is entering. Okay? And of the bubonic plagues, there have been three main ones. The first was around the 14th century in Europe, and then there were further ones, and eventually it escaped to Asia. And as we started ship things more, even with sail boats, for example, we managed to spread it from Italy and the Islamic world and all around the world. So epidemic diseases need our attention, okay? And we have more recent ones: SARS, Ebola, the Zika virus, the ravages of HIV and AIDS, and I'll go into those in more detail. So climate change increased the chances of disease because we cut down the forest and removed the habitats of the wild animals and birds and rats and lice and fleas, and they start moving into cities, for example. more likely in cities of poverty and dirt, for example. So so there are vectors that carry it: mosquitoes, lice, fleas, smallpox, TB, typhus. They all were different viruses and funguses, and they use different vectors to spread itself. Okay, and how did people interpret that thousands of years ago? They had divine interpretation of disease. They would quote the Bible, for example, that people received these viruses, pandemics, epidemics, bacteria as punishment for evil they had done. That was a belief at that time, and you can read about it in Exodus and in Genesis. That they were expressing the will of God. Science had not advanced, and that's what they believed at that time. And Jerry Falwell, for example, tried to tell people that homosexuality was a disease, and promoted that. So to use religion to promote what was happening to the human race as an idea was common in years since. The ancient Greeks had a man named Galen who looked back at Hippocrates, who had lived before that time, and also tried to explain pandemics, epidemics through demonics and religion and beliefs. The South American Indians did the same thing. Then there was a humoral theory of disease, sort of like a cube, where we use melancholy, sanguinity, cholemic type things to express that this was the cause of disease. They just weren't sure. The bubonic plague, which we have been speaking about, was very virulent. Okay, the death rate from having it was around 50%. 50% of the people died who were exposed to it. Okay, and it killed people in the prime of life, not just children. A lot of illnesses were the children got them, like the measles, for example. But bubonic plague killed people of all financial conditions in the prime of life, and there were epidemics, localized, and then many became pandemics. There wasn't as much traveling then, so they didn't spread as easily. Florence had a big one. Italy, we're talking about Italy. In Italy in the 1900s, it killed. That was the second epidemic. Killed about 50% of the people. Yeah, I visited Florence, in a beautiful, beautiful city, and I saw David too, and I visited some of the museums. Galileo Museum, for example, it used to be called the Science Museum in Florence. It's now called the Galileo Museum. I saw the original instruments that Galileo Copernicus used to look at the universe. There's science for you. Okay, and so around Italy, they started in the islands, and then spread to the main continent, and some had been in Istanbul and spread through shipping, through sail ships which landed in Italy, and they were carrying the rats and the fleas, and disease spread quickly. So plague it's a disease, and the bubonic plague, they would have these boils, which you could see them. They were in your neck and your axilla. They followed the lymphatic system, where you, Army, Navy, and Air Force, your resistance is located. They would attack the bacteria, and these boils would come up. That would always identify a person that had it. The bacteria was Y. pestis, P-E-S-T-I-S. It spread so quickly, it reproduced. The numbers would double every 2 hours. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? So the first one was in Messina, 1347. What was the first one? And then it spread to the Islamic world through commerce, through industry, shipping, for example. The second plague occurred in Naples, Italy, and the government reacted to it by establishing public health. Lessons had been learned, and they would spread the word to try to educate the public. I think more than, to me, is occurring today. We have the internet, and we've got radio, TV, we can write, we can print. We should have sent the information out across the world much quicker and established standards, and our death rate would have been way down. Another disease came along called smallpox, and this was a virus in the 11th to the 12th century, and had spread all over the world. So we've had the bubonic plague, and now smallpox, and the CFR rate also was quite high, around 50%. Okay, and people had manifestation of it in the skin. They would have these pox all over the place, which were little boils, a reaction to the pathogen, and it resulted in probably a good half of the people of country that had it, of having visual effects. You could tell by looking at the person that they had these pox that survived. It had a high death rate, but once survived, you could take actually a beautiful person, and they could very quickly, a matter of a week or two, their appearance would be very unpleasant. So it had tremendous social aspects to it. And it occurred in the 11th, 12th century in Europe, and it affected rich and poor. It, like the royalty, were affected so much. You know, the House of Hanover was totally destroyed. So it affected the kings and queens and the church and the bishops, but what they found of there are many different forms of it, of smallpox, and there was a form that was different genes that were confined to cows, okay, and a Dr. Jenner noticed that there was many women who were milking the cows. Not many of them died from smallpox, and he was bright enough to really study it in detail and realize that you could take the blood, and he first tried it actually on a child. You know, how he got away with that, I don't know. And injected him with some of the blood from the cow, and exposed him. Yeah, can't believe it. Exposed him to the smallpox virus, and the people didn't die. So he knew then there was something to immunization. And then they tried it many different ways, but that was really the first immunization where they understood it. And also, you know, around that time, Europeans invaded the Dominican Republic, for example, and all the locals who were beautiful people. Even Columbus describes them. I mean, they looked like movie stars because they were eating nature. Nature has symmetry, mathematics in it, and they were beautiful natives, but 90% of them died because they had no immunity to the viruses and bacteria that were coming in. Eventually, because Napoleon needed this land as a stopover to make his way to Louisiana, which he had bought, but really not put a lot of soldiers into. But when Napoleon came in, and because like Haiti, Dominican Republic, they had slavery. They imported slaves to run about 2,000 huge farms, and the goods, from coffee to corn to what, they sent it all back to France, and they were making a huge amount of money. So the French and a native slave rose up and formed an army and really kicked the French out. But Napoleon came back with an army, but they had not been exposed to yellow fever, which a lot of the natives had immunity to, and the yellow fever really essentially destroyed Napoleon's army. That's a interesting story, and so Europe destroyed a lot of the natives, even in South America, and because of the bacteria and viruses that they brought in, and they did it in the name of religion. That happened. You can read that history. And I have some books I'm going to hold up later, so you can learn something about it. And then Napoleon even invaded Russia, as you know, and the epidemics and pandemics that he brought with him destroyed a lot of the Russian people, and the Russian people had their own viruses, bacteria, and destroyed a lot of Napoleon's army, and eventually he had to, you know, withdraw. So the Bible of nature really is the human body, our human body. Nature comes and our body does not have the immunity sometimes to fight what's coming at us, like the coronavirus, which is taking advantage of the people who have pre-existing diseases. And some of the elderly, they don't have good resistance. And the type 2 diabetics who have poor resistance, the virus is attacking them. And an example would be our leader today, who might, I would think, has some pre-existing disease, at least we spoke about, and he become infected. It's complex, so you got to be open-minded. This is not political. It's about life and death, and we wish him well. But it's about life and death. So at that time, we weren't certain really what was killing the people, okay? Then came along the germ theory of disease, where when the microscope was developed, and they could at least see the bacteria, very small creatures, but they still could not, and they called them animalcules, animalcules. The electron microscope will be discovered later than that, which could see the viruses, okay? But once we saw the bacteria, we could at least have a germ theory of disease. So science was advancing. So this is the time of Isaac Newton, Galileo, Descartes, the time where we were studying the universe. We were all looking inside of us, and also discovering the human body. And names you, and when Semmelweis was a Hungarian gynecologist in Vienna, he was studying the mortality of women in childbirth, and he noticed a difference between the nurses that were delivering babies at home. Their death rate was much less than the doctors that were delivering the babies in the hospital. And he began to pay attention to that, and the doctor rate of delivering the baby was much higher. So with that, they studied the viruses and bacteria and the differences. Then cholera came along, mainly in London. London was a big source of demonstrating these illnesses, as it is today. The U.S. and Britain are leading the world in the coronavirus-19 infection. You'd think we'd have learned a few lessons. So three famous doctors led this fight of the pandemics and epidemics. Louis Pasteur, 1822, 1895, a Dr. Snow, and Semmelweis. Those three were debating back and forth. But you know, the interesting thing was when one of them died, and I think it was Semmelweis when he died, he was talking to Pasteur, talking to Dr. Pasteur, okay? And Pasteur admitted to the dying Dr. Semmelweis that, you're right, Dr. Semmelweis, it's the soil. What he's saying is, it's more important. The most important part is to know what the virus or bacteria is living on. That remind you of anything I've been speaking about today? They said it at that time. In other words, whether it's bacteria or virus or different viruses, bacteria, the main thing was to know what feeds the food to the microbe. That's what I'm speaking about. Am I not speaking about that? So what a government, I think, should have done, and this had been the opportunity to point out to people how to get rid of type 2 diabetes, which causes about 30 or 40 diseases, from dementia to amputations to heart attacks to strokes and dislocation. I can go on and on. If they had at this time taken this opportunity, because if you get rid of that, you're less likely to die from the virus, which they may have been. Now, want to bring up, because probably 90% of certain racial groups have type 2 diabetes. 70% of other groups, Asian groups, for example, especially South Americans, who were not even properly tested. If they ran the serum insulin test on them, I think it would double the rate. But this smells of opportunity, okay? A chance. They should have taken this opportunity to teach people to get rid of type 2 diabetes, which would save them from 34 diseases and a possible death from the virus. What an opportunity. We're missing it. I'm not missing it. I'm speaking about it today. And I speak about it every day. Isn't that interesting? That Pasteur, very famous from Paris, very famous, who was part of the Paris School of Medicine at that time, an avant-garde group of people. And this was at the time of the Renaissance, and where people begin to wake up that there is science behind a lot of things. It isn't just the will of God destroying us. No, there's science behind this. It was lack of knowledge that was there. So antibiotics, which kill bacteria, not viruses, were not developed till after World War II. A lot of that, Joseph Lister led a lot of that fight, and he used carbolic acid even as a pump to sterilize areas and before surgery is done. So that was the transition of that. So cholera was a bacteria, okay? And there was 7 epidemics, about 1817 to 1961. It's characterized by a lot of diarrhea, where you lose the fluids. The fluid loss was killing the people. It came out, frankly, as watered rice, looked like rice. But people were traveling and spreading it, okay? So the death rate for anybody who had it was extremely high, maybe approached 90%. A Dr. Koch, K-O-C-H, 1883 or so, discovered it, okay? Ricey stools is what he talked about, and the patients lost so much fluid, they even said they looked like cadavers. They were black, no expression, and were just laying all over the streets. And there are even some pictures of them being picked up. I saw them in this book I read. Now I might pull up a book. I have 4 books with me. There are many other books, but I want you to know I'm coming from science, maybe 5% opinion, the rest is science. The End of Epidemics by Jonathan Quick, an excellent book I'd like to hold up for you. And he has a plan in there. He describes the epidemics, and then a plan on there and how to prevent future epidemics, and I will review those with you. Then cholera popped up again in Peru in 1991. Remember I said there were many epidemics. So how do we end these epidemics and pandemics? What can be done to stop the next killer virus? Let's talk about that a little bit, especially as I held out that book for you. I think it will be difficulty. And a new pandemic, an epidemic, could kill. They've determined that through science, about 300 million people in about 200 days. That's what they've determined. Bill Gates studied it, and we have to thank him for the Gates Foundation and the tremendous amount of money and time and study they've done of these pandemics and epidemics. So we thank you, Bill Gates. And that's what he's thinking. They could reduce our gross domestic product 10%, put most people in poverty. So in 2014, there's formed an organization, MSH, you can find them on a computer, Management Sciences for Health, MSH. And the founder was Mr. Quick, Jonathan D. Quick, so he was involved. And actually, Jonathan D. Quick was all over the world, even took his family and kids. He studied pandemics, epidemics, and was right in the bush. He was really in it. We have to thank him for speaking up. we've had some epidemics since from 1976. We've had about 20 outbreaks. And, but denial by politicians, poverty, complacency, lack of transparency, some failure of the World Health Organization, which we pulled out of. I personally think we should have gotten into it and made it better, along with all these other agencies we have who were sleeping on the job. Basically, good people, but sleeping on the job. And so Dr. Quick says that we can achieve the impossible if we concentrate on it. He took an example being, we decided to go to the moon. Kennedy decided that, and we did. We made we didn't have hardly any of the science developed. We made our mind we were going to do that, and we did. And what Dr. Quick is thinking, we can do the same with these pandemics and epidemics. Well, he's got a point. So he has a list of 7 things, and I'll comment on them a little bit. So list number 1. And he says using bold leadership at all levels. Well, leadership failed us, didn't it? So the other agencies, even other agencies, CDC, health services, public health, they all failed us. So I don't know that I agree with that, okay? That doesn't mean that we could work on improving that. Number 2, build resilient health systems. Well, the problem with that is, I like the idea, and we should work on that. The problem is we don't, in this country, have a unified health system. Our leadership turned it over to each individual state. One state said wear masks, one said don't wear masks, one open for business, one closed for business. That didn't work. So, but again, he says, work on changing that. We have to agree with that, okay? So then he says take 3 steps: prevention, detection, treatment, okay? But preventative treatment, for example, a type 2 diabetes rate, which in this probably over half the nation has type 2 diabetes, which attracts these diseases because it provides the energy, the sugar, and the fatty acids. Okay, they don't even attack that. Over half the nation is type 2 diabetic. They'll never attack that. You know why? It's the money. Too much money. I'm to the point I've declared, Rudy's, war on diabetes to wake people up that we have to work from the bottom up, which will include the virus and the diabetes, by informing the people. Informing the people. And next, number 4, he has timely and accurate information. That's great, but I tell you, the information is partly controlled by the government. Yes. You watch TV lately? Are you getting accurate information? I'm sad to say, you know, and I know, a lot of lies have been told, and you can interpret that any way that you like. And I'm looking from a medical point, okay? And then he says, number 5, investing in new and accurate information, okay? Further technology, but I say all around the world. We need to all be connected. In their countries that can't afford all that, we have to help them maybe through the WHO or whatever. And number 6, investing wisely before epidemic strikes. So what he suggests, and even as a chapter, that we maybe take $1 from each person and across the world, then invest that wisely on getting information around. I mean, it's a good idea, but considering we have dictatorships and democracies, and some democracies that may become dictatorships, it's very hard to do that, but I think it's a good try. Number 7, he writes down mobilizing the public. Organizations that go around the world that meet maybe once a month at least, gather information, send it out on Facebook or other information systems. That in the end may almost be the best. But number 8, he didn't write that, I wrote that. Throughout these books which I read, and I'll load up some more after a while, is that we need to speak about the soil. What are these viruses and bacteria living in? Maybe we, through our behavior, can change the soil and get at the root of the problem. Get at the root of the problem and cut down the spread, cut down the death rate. I think that would be this answer, especially since we at the same time, besides eliminating type 2 diabetes, which is feeding the virus, but many people have type 2 diabetes and 30, 40 diseases without the virus, and they die anyway. So we could, by changing the soil, we save them, we save the virus. What do you think, guys? I think that's a good idea. For me, that's number 8. And lastly, I'd like to say maybe there's some racial overtones. Just think back about Columbus and around that time. I'm sure they did not exactly mean to. They came in with the bacteria, and the natives didn't have resistance, and many of them died. But maybe today there's certain racial groups which have extremely high rates of diabetes and the sugar in the cell. Black community is 90% diabetic. I'm certain of it. I'm in there. I've studied that. And I mean it out of the goodness of my heart because I like them to live, okay, and avoid the disabilities. But do we have leaders that are racist who know that the virus is killing a lot more people from the virus? They know these racial and ethnic groups have much higher rates of diabetes. Is that a racist thing? I don't know. But someone needs to ask. It's been done in the past. Is it being now? I don't know. I'm just saying a lot of racial issues going on listening to the TV. So let me, also we need to think in terms of war. The germ warfare. Germ warfare is more threatening than atomic war. You don't think so? You could easily kill a whole nation with germ warfare. Could be easily be done. You could take centers of government and spread the viruses and bacteria and poisonings, which you read out in the press consistently. Some governments know what it takes to kill somebody with a germ or bacteria. I mean, they all know it. And some have been using it almost to the present time. So if you wanted to destroy another country or another peoples or even one individual through germs and viruses, not hard to do. That's of great concern. So when we spend all this money on the military, we're much more likely to kill a nation or people with germs and bacteria than atomic warfare or with tanks and bullets. They're even using drones today. U.S. uses drones to kill a leader recently, okay? So if you were on these drones, send 1,000 drones out full of bacteria and viruses to a certain city, you could kill all the people. So that is of danger to us. So we must have a good Secret Service, be aware of things, maybe negotiate better, maybe speak a little bit better, but it's of danger. So there have been many outbreaks in the last century. Spanish flu, 1918, 50 million dead. Actually, it didn't originate there, but they just named it there because they had communication from there. 1937, the West Nile. Then the Hong Kong flu, which had many different expressions, different viruses. H3N2 virus, that was the flu. About 700,000 died. Ebola, 1976, 2012 was an outbreak. HIV, AIDS, 40 million dead, many disabled. Eventually, now we're doing a little bit better with it, but there were religious overtones. For example, a lot of churches, a lot more of this was seen in homosexuality, so a lot of churches took acceptance to study this disease, for example. That was a big social thing. SARS, 2002, Asian flu, 2016, swine flu, 289,000 died, 290,000 died. 2009, MERS, 2016, Asian flu, 2016, Ebola, mainly in Africa, 11,323. So our president, Coronavirus 19, eventually he will leave. But vaccination is what all you hear about. But the virus may even be gone time the vaccine is available. Get vaccinated. I know people belong to groups. I'm not going to vaccinate the family, but I tell you, I take it from my heart. Public health, you need to follow that. If they recommend you get vaccinated, you need to have it done, because you may not get vaccinated, but maybe your whole family get killed because you weren't vaccinated. Suppose you don't get vaccinated, your neighbor has a virus or the bacteria, kills your whole family, okay? And that's possible, and it does happen. That's the reason we had a recent measles outbreak, I think, because it was the non-vaxxers. They have organizations, the intelligent people. I went to one of the meetings one time. They're making a big mistake. You know what it tells me? You don't get vaccinated, you don't care about the other people. You don't give a darn that your neighbors may be killed, or that you spread it to a few 100,000 people, maybe across the world. If they recommend a vaccine, get vaccinated. It's the best we can do. But then also pay attention to your soil, so you're less likely to get it. Okay, so what's coming up? I mean, it's possible that by February or March, with this Coronavirus 19 virus, more people in the United States who would have been killed than there were killed in World War II. Please obey the recommendations, learn about them, maybe read some books about them, maybe look on the internet. The government may not be the most reliable source, although you got to listen. Some of the things they say or do would be truthful. I think the CDC would be truthful most of the time, although they missed the outbreak, the start of this. So multiple sources of information are important. So somewhere today, right now, a virus is balling up in a bird, a pig, a monkey, getting ready to jump onto a human. Bill Gates, which we spoke about, uses computer solution, gathers information. But I got a little something to pick with him too, because he had an opportunity to kill this diabetes epidemic. He had the resources, the soil. He could have attacked the soil. He is not attacking the soil, maybe something I don't know about. He's attacking mainly the viruses and bacteria, but this soil is where they get their energy. So if we remove the soil, we would very quickly reduce our pandemics and epidemics. That is an opinion piece on my part. But remember the three famous doctors, Semmelweis and those guys in the past? That was their idea. It's the soil. That's what they were saying. I think that's correct. And all these 4 books here don't even discuss it. Not one line on the soil in these books. Hard to believe, but it's the way that it is. So Bill Gates thinks is the next pandemic, epidemic, and I think the one we have now has occurred since he wrote this, because of cars, ships, planes, trains. We'll have over 30 million dead in about 200 days in the next epidemic. I hope he's wrong. If we improve our own soil, our own responsibility, you're more likely to live. And he thinks there'll be a tremendous economic results. The stock market will crash, our wealth will disappear. So we've spent $2.5 trillion already paying businesses and wages, which were very important. I agree with that, and I hope they come up with another stimulus package here, because people are living on the edge of poverty, in poverty, maybe on the street even. I think we're going to have to spend some money. We'll pay it back down the line. But there's greed in the bottom line. Why do a lot of us have poor soil? Because greedy corporations, greedy individuals are selling us this stuff, processed food, establishing great businesses and destroying our health. Look around, look around. Incidentally, 40% of the people who look fine, trophies thin on the outside, but they have fat on the inside in their liver, their mesentery, have diabetes. So get that insulin test, not just the blood sugar, insulin tolerance test, fasting 1 hour, 2 hours, then you will know whether you have it or on the path. Okay? Listen to what I said. Here's another few things I'd like to mention. 10 lessons for a post-pandemic world. Okay? Now, the World Health Organization has recommended. See, the plague didn't totally go away. There's still a little bit in every country every year, but we can treat it with antibiotics. Okay, isn't that great? So in years past, though, this gathering of information about plagues and epidemics and health led to the Renaissance and Reformation and Enlightenment. We became smarter, but we need to be enlightened again. We need to be enlightened again. So in June, just listen to this, 2017, remember this, not a political statement, and in June 2017, our president government cut the budget of health agencies associated with public health. So when I blame public health, I'll admit, is that a lot of the funds have been cut, but their leaders at the top, the organizations, they know a lot. They should have told us, okay? Our country decided to promote wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, falsely invading Iraq, for example, and our war on terror. We spent $5.4 trillion. Suppose we had spent that on public health. We wouldn't be suffering from all these epidemics and pandemics. Nowhere near as much, and maybe not at all. So I'm going to give you a quote, and his name is Larry Brilliant. He was brilliant. And what he said was, outbreaks are inevitable. Outbreaks are inevitable. Pandemics are optional. Outbreaks are inevitable. They will always happen. So we need a good communication system. It needs to be well funded. Larry Brilliant, doctor, indeed was brilliant because he ended smallpox. The vaccination for it killed the disease. It's gone. This horrific disease which is affecting the whole body, destroying people's lives, even if they lived. So what matters is not quantity, but the quality of the government, okay? So, matter of fact, John Hopkins released the Global Health Security Index, and the U.S. was voted #1 in resources and everything, but it failed miserably when the epidemic occurred. So other books I like to read, Epidemics and Society, another book that summarizes it very well. Epidemics and Society, very good read. Here we go. Excellent read. So we get fully informed. So I appreciate you watching me. I told you some of the history, some of the things we should do. It all came from my heart to save you, to get rid of the virus and the diabetes, which are operating in our unhealthy soil. You can do things about both that way. Look at my other YouTube shows or see me for free at the Three Rivers Pharmacy by Concordia High. If you get diabetes, you want to get rid of it to improve your soil. I'll teach it to you for nothing. I love you. Thanks for watching my show. Bye-bye.